lies.
A lot of people found you initially through the, I think, Canadian Bill C-16 or something like that, where it was the misgendering of people, making that illegal. I haven't heard much more about that in past weeks. Can you kind of give a quick synopsis? Or it's probably impossible to do that quickly given how dense it is. But just for those who aren't fully up to date with what kind of rocketed you into stardom so quickly.
Yeah, well, I made a video. I made 2 videos. I made 3 videos in a week last year, September 27th approximately. And one of them was a critique of this bill C-16. It was a federal bill in Canada. It had already been passed into law in some of the provinces in Canada. And it purported to add gender identity and gender expression to the list of protected groups under the Canadian human rights legislation. And that sounds, in some sense, that sounds innocuous enough, but I had been reading the background policies that constituted the, you might say, legislative and policy surround of the amendment of the bill, and they're absolutely appalling. They were mostly written by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is a social justice organization. By its own admission, Ontario has social justice tribunals, and the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is one of them, and it's tightly associated with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And there was a variety of things about it that I found appalling beyond comprehension. One of them was that the requirement to use this novel linguistic forms to refer to people who don't fit on the gender distribution, let's say, Z and Zer and their variants of those words, which have never entered common English parlance, and should not, and whose use should not be enforced. Especially my issue was, it had nothing to do with transgenderism as far as I was concerned. It was that I didn't want to speak the language of postmodern neo-Marxists for any reason, gender rights or transgender rights or for any other reason. I thought those were neologisms that they had created as part and parcel of their overarching and rather traitorous doctrine, as far as I'm concerned. I don't like postmodern neo-Marxists in the least, or ideologues of any type, and I'm not going to use their language, and I don't care what the damn rationale is. And to write that into the law, it just made my jaw drop that Canada was considering compelled speech as.
That's the important part to me, the compelling of the speech, because it always,
that's the important part, all right.
You ask people about taxes in like a friendly conversation, and you say, well, hey, so what happens if you don't pay your taxes? And they're like, well, this happens, and then what happens? And at the end of that timeline, men with guns come, right. And so that's what compelling means. It could be this little thing that we all have in our lives, and you do know that if you just stopped mailing that piece of paper off every month, men with guns would eventually come here and take you away, right? Like, that's the eventuality to not paying your power bill for long enough. They'll eventually, or your mortgage, they're eventually going to come get you. And that's what's not really spoken out loud, I'm sure, when these guys are waving the flag of this bill. There's nobody saying, oh, and if you don't, well, the Mounties come.
Yeah, well,
the queer Mounties, they wear a rainbow get up, and they're on a giant caribou, and they put you on a rail through town and flog you, and like what's coming? What are they gonna do?
I think they ride moose here.
It makes more sense. Well, these are the queer Mounties. They prefer the elk.
So people immediately criticized me for overreacting to the legislation, but then the university helpfully sent me 2 warning letters telling me to stop saying what I was saying, because I was probably violating the university's diversity codes, although I wasn't violating their free speech codes. Let's make that clear, and also possibly the Ontario law, which was exactly the point I was making in the video. So I was immediately backed up in my paranoia by the university's legal department, and then I contacted a number of lawyers and had them, and many of them contacted me, and so we reviewed the policy and the legislation together, and I had a debate at Queen's University with a law professor who actually played devil's advocate, because none of the cowards who are part of the faculty at Queen's University would debate me, which is pretty much has been the standard situation here. So, and then we went and talked to the Senate, the Canadian Senate too, and tried to describe the danger that was associated with this bill. And that was quite funny, because I think it was probably the most watched Senate hearing ever in Canadian history. I think maybe about 500,000 people have watched that. And the senators tried to put me on the spot quite rudely and unprofessionally, in my opinion, because I was being very careful with what I was saying and doing. And that didn't go very well either. Well, it went fine for me, which was very fortunate, but it didn't go that well for the senators. But they passed the damn bill anyways. And you know, the senator that I was working with proposed an amendment to the bill, which was his attempt to have the justice minister write into the bill an amendment that said that this wouldn't interfere with freedom of speech. And she wouldn't do it.
So basically a tacit admission that its entire purpose is to curb freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Certainly a tacit admission that the diversity machine trumps all other rights, diversity and equity, which is exactly the case in Canada. It's like hypothetically none of the rights trump one another, you know, which is ridiculous because there has to be a hierarchy. But in Canada, it's the equity rights trump everything, and I'm not happy about that in the least. I think it's absolutely brutally appalling.
Did you find when you came out against that there was a large upsurge of people kind of on the down low telling you, hey, I think it's great what you're doing? Or was it pretty much just a tidal wave of people distancing themselves as in the academia?
It was an absolute, in academia, like it was radio silence fundamentally. I mean, 200 faculty and graduate student types signed a petition describing me as, you know, transforming the campus into an unsafe space, and then that was part of why the university went after me. And then after that, my colleagues were basically silent. Not all of them. There's a small group in Canada called Society for Academic Freedom, and they supported me. And Gad Saad came out and supported me right away. He's that business professor at Concordia University who has quite a YouTube following and quite an advocate of free speech. There's a couple of us in Canada that have been playing this role. But the public support was absolutely overwhelming. And also the support from the journalists. Like, first of all, the journalists reacted sort of 50-50 split, eh? Half of them supported me and half of them thought that I was just a noisy troublemaker. And actually, I have some sympathy for that viewpoint, because when someone comes out in a country like Canada and waves his or her hand and says, there's something rotten in the state, the most logical initial response is, why the hell should we listen to you? You're just paranoid and delusional, because this is a pretty good country and has been forever. And so you should view someone like that with skepticism. But the problem is that it actually turned out that I'd read the policies and I knew what the hell I was talking about. And so when the journalists started to investigate it and find out that this really was a free speech issue, and you know, it's actually rather important to journalists to have free speech, I got overwhelming support. Like 200 Canadian newspapers came out in support of what I was doing, and so all of that helped the university back off. The university didn't know what to do, really. They hadn't had a issue to deal with like that ever, probably. And I mean, I should also say the university has treated me quite well since this has all got straightened around.
Yeah, it would seem like newspapers and print in general would kind of side with you on this. I'm wondering what is the future of, say, libel laws? Like what if I write a story in my paper about a person and I refer to them in the incorrect gender? Have I libeled them now? Have I broken a law in some way by not referring to this person as Zer or Z?
Yes.
Or
yes, you have broken.
And as a
law.
professional journalist, I feel like am I going to have a Brian Williams situation now, or am I going to be let go of are they going to send me away for 6 weeks for some gentrification training or something like that? Or am I going to have to sit in a room and like learn 85,000 genders, and are they going to get out the genderbread man and I'm going to touch his little hand on the left and
the genderbread person?
Because that's my fear. and if I were you, like not my specific fear, it would be my fear for someone in that position. And I wonder if you have any fears like that, because you're there in Toronto, right? You're a tenured professor. What happens next year when you say the wrong thing and the Mounties won't come, but someone might? Well,
I've been living in some amount of existential terror since September about saying the wrong thing, because it was my life has been very chaotic and well, that's the right way to put it, very chaotic since all this has happened. But my confidence has been growing, I would say, again, for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, I think I was fortunate when I made those initial videos because I'd already had 250 hours of single thing I'd ever said to students recorded and on YouTube. So when people went after me for the standard, for being the standard, evil guy, the transphobe and bigot and racist, for God's sake, because I criticized these two horrendous women that run Black Lives Matter in Toronto. It's like, I don't care if they're green. I was going to criticize them. It had nothing to do with them being black. It had everything to do with them being dangerous and crooked, which they are.
What is it that they purport? Do they say that white people, because we have less melanin, are less connected to the spiritual world, or less connected to God, and we're
like the Black Israelites?
Yeah, that's
would
one
you
of their,
hear that kind of
rants. Yeah,
that is so close to the same shit you would hear coming right out of Goebbels' mouth. That's Nazi propaganda about with a Jewish man with whiskers like a rat scurrying or something.
Yeah. Well,
Dr.
I think
Peterson,
just
do you worry that you're just mean though?
yeah,
because there's an argument to be made that like the people that you're against aren't completely mentally healthy.
Oh,
right.
Well,
and you are not being kind, right? You're saying, you know what? I don't like the way you're wired. I'm going to deal with you the way that I like to deal with people, even though, like, in my opinion, they might be in some amount of pain or distress, right? Their suicide rates are much higher, right, in that community.
Oh yeah,
like 10 times higher. Yeah.
Okay, and so like I'm not enthusiastic about calling someone Zer. If my coworker asked me to call them that, I'd probably not go to lunch with them, right? They probably wouldn't be my kind of guy, or Zer, whatever it is that they are. But I would
take 2 weeks, Woody.
Yeah. But I do think that guy's probably in some amount of pain, and perhaps I would handle him with kid gloves. You don't want to do that.
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, I probably would, because I'm soft-hearted beyond what would you call it? Beyond any
Well, you're
admirability.
Canadian. It goes without saying, right?
Well, and yeah, there's that's for sure. But the thing is, one of the things we want to make, two things. The first is, my colleagues kind of said the same thing. They said, well, we like what you're doing, but couldn't you be nicer about it? And I wasn't really very happy about that, because basically what they were saying was, had we done what you did, we would have done it better. It's like, yeah, go right ahead, man, and try. So if you can do it better, hey, I'm right behind you. So, and I'm not really a big fan of nice. I think it's a low-end virtue. Now, that doesn't mean mean is good, but nice and harmless and naive are very difficult to distinguish, and I don't think those are virtues. Usually they're just a matter of not having any teeth. So, but let's speak more specifically about this. So first of all, there's absolutely no reason to assume that the transgender activists speak for transgender people. And just because an activist comes along and says, well, this is what I purport to believe on behalf of my group, doesn't mean we should believe that that's what the group believes, or that person has any right to put forward that proposition as a just because you're transgender doesn't mean you're a representative of the transgendered community. So it's absurd. And I've had, like, literally, I think it's 30, because I've tried to keep count, 30 transgendered people write me, and many more comment on YouTube that they're 100% behind me, and that they are absolutely appalled at the negative attention these crazy activists have brought to bear on this situation. Most of them, first of all, most of them don't want to be referred to by these strange pronouns, which are third person anyways, for crying out loud, so you'd never use them in a first person conversation. And second of all, most of them want to be referred to by the normative pronoun, just the other one. And I actually have no problem with that. Like, if you come up to me and you look female and you want to be called she, it's like, it's all the same to me. And it didn't have anything to do with, like I said, it didn't really have anything to do with the transgender issue. It was, and people have asked me, well, why do you pick that mountain to die on? And the answer to that is, well, when there's encroachment, right, especially on the territory of free speech, and each bit of encroachment is an inch, and you think, well, it's just an inch, what the hell? Well, at some point you have to say, no, not another inch. And well, for me, it was quite straightforward, because I'm not using postmodern neo-Marxist neologisms, period. So that was an easy decision for me. Now, the original question was, well, how is all this washed out in some sense? And it's actually quite comical how it's worked out. And if I had any sense, I probably wouldn't say this, but I don't have that much sense, so I probably will. I've been in a very comical position since probably January, because what happens now is if the left-wing radicals come out and protest me, if I get to speak, then like 150,000 people watch the talk. So that's good, and it goes well publicly because my audiences are generally, they're happy about what's happening. And then if they protest, then the protest gets filmed and it gets put online, it gets 500,000 views. So I'm in this weird situation now where if people leave me alone, then I get to talk. And if people come and harass me, let's say, and protest, especially in the way they've been conducting their protests, it's scandalous. And 500,000 people watch it. And what's even more comical, and this is the part I shouldn't say, but I'm going to say it because it is comical, is that that's all monetized now. So it's really hard on the social justice types, because if they come out and protest me, then my Patreon account grows. And there's nothing that irritates radical leftists more than someone making money. And so I'm the first person I know who's been able to monetize social justice warrior protests. So which I think is, you ought to think that's pretty damn funny.